My name is Eleanor Patterson, and at 68 years old, I never expected my own son would abandon me at a Goodwill donation center. Roger, my 45-year-old son, has always lived off my success as the founder of Patterson Real Estate. That day at Goodwill changed everything. When he claimed leaving me there was just an accident, I decided his inheritance would suffer the same fate. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come at the highest price. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, and please hit that like and subscribe button while I share how I rebuilt my legacy after betrayal. I wasn't always wealthy. My journey began in a small apartment in Milwaukee where my parents raised 4 children on a factory worker's salary. From an early age, I understood the value of hard work and persistence. While other girls my age were planning weddings, I was planning business strategies. By 22, I had saved enough from 3 jobs to make a down payment on my first property investment. That dilapidated duplex became the cornerstone of what would eventually grow into Patterson Real Estate, now one of the largest independent agencies in the Midwest. Thomas, my late husband, entered my life when I was 30. He was charming, educated, and came from family money. We were opposites in many ways, but our differences complemented each other. At least they did in our marriage. When it came to parenting our son Roger, those differences became a source of constant tension. Roger was born when I was 33, relatively late for my generation. Perhaps because he was our only child, or perhaps because of Thomas's own upbringing, my husband insisted on giving Roger everything. Nothing was too expensive, no request too extravagant. Where I saw warning signs, Thomas saw a boy simply enjoying the fruits of our success. "He's just a child, Eleanor," Thomas would say whenever I suggested Roger needed more structure and responsibility. "There's plenty of time for him to learn about the real world." But that time never seemed to come. When Roger was 16, he wrecked the brand new BMW Thomas bought him for his birthday. Rather than having Roger work to pay for repairs as I suggested, Thomas simply bought him another one. The pattern was established early and deeply. College was another disaster. Roger attended 3 different universities in 5 years, eventually graduating with a mediocre degree in communications that Thomas's alumni connections helped secure. Throughout those years, the calls for extra money were constant. Apartment damages, unexpected expenses, spring break trips that somehow always cost thousands more than budgeted. "It's just what kids do," Thomas would reassure me. I was the same way. The difference was that Thomas's rebellion had been against his parents' money, not fueled by it. By his age, Thomas had already started working at his father's law firm, determined to prove his own worth. Roger showed no such ambition. After college, Roger's first business venture was a sports bar that failed within 9 months. I reluctantly provided the startup capital, hoping responsibility would finally mature him. Instead, he spent more time drinking with friends than managing the business. When it failed, he blamed the location, the economy, his business partner, everyone but himself. Thomas passed away suddenly from a heart attack 10 years ago, leaving me alone to deal with Roger's escalating demands. Without Thomas as a buffer, the true extent of Roger's entitlement became impossible to ignore. Still, he was my only child. I continued supporting him through 2 more failed businesses, a messy divorce from Diane, and countless personal loans that were never repaid. Last year, my longtime financial advisor and friend Barbara Williams finally asked the question I'd been avoiding for decades. "Eleanor, what exactly are you trying to accomplish by continuing to fund Roger's lifestyle?" I had no good answer. "Have you considered that your money might be hurting him rather than helping?" she pressed. "What kind of mother would I be if I cut him off completely?" I asked. "What kind of mother would you be if you didn't?" Barbara countered. "He's 45 years old, Eleanor. At what point does helping become enabling?" I dismissed her concerns initially. After all, what else would I do with my money? Despite Roger's flaws, he was my son, my only family. The Patterson fortune would naturally pass to him someday. That was the plan Thomas and I had always had, and changing it felt like betraying my late husband's memory. But Barbara's questions lingered, especially as Roger's behavior became increasingly entitled. He visited only when he needed something, called only when he was in trouble. The genuine connection I craved with my only child seemed more distant with each passing year. Little did I know that an ordinary day of spring cleaning would finally force me to face the truth I'd been avoiding for decades. The third Saturday in April started like any other spring day. After 10 years alone in the 5-bedroom colonial Thomas and I had shared, I had finally decided it was time to downsize. My knees weren't what they used to be, and maintaining such a large property had become more burden than comfort. The first step was clearing out decades of accumulated possessions. I had spent weeks sorting through closets and storage spaces, creating piles for keeping, selling, and donating. The donation pile had grown impressively large. Clothing, household items, books, and decorative pieces that no longer fit my life but could certainly benefit others. When I called Roger to ask for his help transporting everything to Goodwill, his response was predictably unenthusiastic. "Mom, I had plans this weekend," he complained, though he didn't specify what those plans might be. "I need your help, Roger. The donation center is only open until 5, and I can't manage all these boxes myself," I explained. After several minutes of negotiation that felt more like begging, Roger reluctantly agreed to come by around noon. He arrived at 1:30, already irritated as if I had somehow inconvenienced him by requesting this small favor. "I don't see why you need to get rid of all this stuff anyway," he grumbled as we loaded boxes into his SUV, a vehicle I had helped him finance 3 years earlier. "Some of this could be worth money." "It's worth more to me to simplify my life," I replied, choosing not to point out that he had never shown interest in any of these possessions before. Roger sighed dramatically as he lifted a box of books. "This is so heavy. Can't you hire someone to do this?" "I could," I admitted, "but I thought it might be nice to spend some time together." He checked his phone, barely listening. "Whatever. Let's just get this over with." The loading process continued with Roger complaining about everything from the weight of the boxes to the organization of the items. With each criticism, I felt a familiar pang of disappointment, quickly followed by the practiced maternal response of making excuses for his behavior. "He's just having a bad day," I told myself. "He's doing me a favor after all." When the SUV was finally loaded, Roger took the driver's seat while I settled into the passenger side. The Goodwill Donation Center was about 20 minutes away in the next town over. Roger turned the radio to an uncomfortably loud volume, effectively preventing any conversation during the drive. As we pulled into the donation center parking lot, Roger's phone rang. He immediately answered it, his entire demeanor transforming as he spoke to his girlfriend Amanda. "Hey babe," he said, his voice suddenly animated and warm in a way it hadn't been all day. "No, I'm just doing some boring errand with my mom. Should be done soon." The donation center had a drive-through setup. A young attendant motioned for us to pull forward to the unloading area. Roger drove up but remained in the car, still engaged in his conversation. "I'll start unloading," I told him, unbuckling my seatbelt. Roger nodded absently, laughing at something Amanda had said. I stepped out and walked to the back of the SUV. The attendant, whose name tag read Janet, greeted me with a kind smile. "Doing some spring cleaning?" she asked, helping me lift the first box. "Long overdue," I replied. "My son is helping me downsize." Janet and I unloaded several boxes while Roger remained in the car, his animated phone conversation clearly visible through the window. After about 5 minutes, I turned to grab another box and was startled to see Roger's SUV pulling away. My first thought was that he was moving to a parking space to continue his call in private. I waited, continuing to chat with Janet as we sorted through the remaining items I had unloaded. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Roger's SUV did not return. A sinking feeling began to settle in my stomach. I pulled out my cell phone and called Roger. The call went straight to voicemail. "Roger, I'm still at Goodwill. Where did you go?" I left the message, trying to keep my voice steady. 15 minutes later, I was still standing in the donation area, the reality of the situation becoming undeniable. My 45-year-old son had driven off and left me at a Goodwill donation center without a word. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" Janet asked, concern evident in her voice. The humiliation was overwhelming. At 68 years old, I had to admit to this kind young woman that my own son had abandoned me. "I think my son may have," Forgotten I was still here, I said, the words feeling surreal as I spoke them. Janet's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to compassion. Let me call my manager, she said. We can help you figure this out. The manager, a gentleman named Carlos, offered me water and the use of their office phone. I tried Roger's number again. Still voicemail. Can I call someone else for you? Carlos asked. The question hit me harder than I expected. Who would I call? My husband was gone. My closest friends lived in my neighborhood, too far for a quick pickup. I had built a successful business, accumulated wealth and property, but in this moment of need, my support system felt shockingly sparse. I'll just call a taxi, I said, dignity being the only thing I had left to preserve. While waiting for the taxi, I tried Roger once more. This time he answered. Mom, what's up? He asked casually, as if nothing unusual had happened. Roger, you left me at the Goodwill, I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. There was a pause then. Oh shit. I thought you were done and had a ride. No apology. No concern. Just a casual acknowledgement of his mistake. I'll be home in about 40 minutes, I told him. We'll talk then. The taxi arrived shortly after, and I spent the 30-minute ride home in silence, my thoughts tumbling between hurt, anger, and an uncomfortable dawning clarity about my son and our relationship. The taxi fare was $27 plus tip. I paid it without complaint, but something about that mundane transaction crystallized everything for me. How many thousands, perhaps millions, had I spent supporting Roger over the years? And he couldn't even be bothered to remember I was in his car. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to see the truth without making excuses. Roger hadn't forgotten me. He had simply decided that continuing his phone conversation with Amanda was more important than his elderly mother's well-being. The realization was painful but strangely liberating. I felt as if scales had fallen from my eyes after years of willful blindness. By the time the taxi pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. Something needed to change. I just wasn't sure what that something would be. The taxi dropped me off at my home at 3:45 in the afternoon. I paid the driver generously, thanking him for the quiet ride that had given me space to think. As I approached my front door, I noticed Roger's SUV parked in the circular driveway. He had returned to my house after abandoning me. My first reaction was relief that he was safe, quickly followed by renewed anger at his behavior. What possible explanation could he have for leaving his 68-year-old mother stranded at a donation center without transportation? I entered my home through the front door, calling out Roger's name. No response. Following the sound of laughter, I walked through the house toward the back patio. There, lounging by my pool in the spring sunshine, were Roger and a young woman I recognized as Amanda, his latest girlfriend. They were drinking my imported beer, using my pool towels, and had apparently made themselves completely at home in my absence. Neither noticed my arrival until I cleared my throat loudly. "Oh, hey, Mom," Roger said casually, barely looking up from his phone. "You made it back." Amanda at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, sitting up straighter and offering a small wave. "Hi, Mrs. Patterson. Nice to see you again." I stood at the edge of the patio, purse still clutched in my hand. "Roger, would you care to explain what happened earlier?" He shrugged, taking another swig of beer. "Like I said on the phone, I thought you were done and had another ride. No big deal." "No big deal," I repeated, my voice remarkably steady despite my inner turmoil. "You left me stranded at a donation center without transportation or warning. Come on, Mom. You're making it sound way worse than it was. You obviously figured it out." He gestured vaguely toward me. "You're here, aren't you? I had to call a taxi. So? It's not like you can't afford it." Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly sensing the tension that Roger seemed oblivious to. "That's not the point, Roger," I said, stepping closer. "The point is that you drove away while I was unloading donations, didn't tell me you were leaving, and didn't answer my calls for over half an hour." Roger finally looked up from his phone, rolling his eyes dramatically. "I told you I thought you were done. And I didn't answer because Amanda and I were talking about important stuff. Besides, I figured you'd just call one of your rich friends to pick you up. What friends did you think I would call? I asked, genuinely curious about his thought process. He waved dismissively. I don't know. Barbara or whoever. Those country club people you're always having lunch with. The country club is 20 miles from the Goodwill, Roger. Well, how was I supposed to know that? I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. You weren't supposed to know that because you weren't supposed to leave me there in the first place. Roger sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. Look, I said I thought you had a ride. What more do you want from me? I want you to understand why what you did was wrong. It was an accident, Mom. Geez, you're making such a big deal out of nothing. Amanda, looking increasingly uncomfortable, stood up. Maybe I should go. No, stay, Roger insisted, pulling her back down. Mom's just being dramatic. She'll get over it. He turned back to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Right, Mom?
No harm, no foul.
I studied my son's face, searching for any sign of genuine remorse or understanding. I found none. Instead, I saw only entitlement and impatience, as if this conversation was an inconvenience he wanted to end as quickly as possible. Roger, do you really not understand why I'm upset? I asked quietly. He shrugged again. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I forgot you were still unloading stuff. It happens. It happens, I repeated slowly. You forgot that your 68-year-old mother was standing behind your car unloading boxes, so you just drove away without checking. That just happens? Exactly, he said, seemingly relieved that I understood. Accidents happen. I could feel something shifting inside me, a perspective changing irreversibly. This wasn't just about today's incident. It was about a lifetime of similar behaviors, all excused away as accidents, misunderstandings, or just Roger being Roger. Before I could respond, Roger sat up suddenly. Oh, by the way, Amanda and I were thinking about taking a trip to Cancun next month. The all-inclusive resort. Could you help us out with that? Probably about $7,000 for both of us. The audacity of the request in this moment left me speechless. Amanda at least had the grace to look mortified. Roger, I don't think now is the time to, she began. No, it's fine, he interrupted. Mom doesn't stay mad. Do you, Mom? In that moment, looking at my adult son lounging by my pool, drinking my beer, asking for money for a vacation immediately after abandoning me at a donation center, something inside me finally broke. Or perhaps something finally healed. I need some time to myself, I said quietly. Please lock up when you leave. I turned and walked into the house, ignoring Roger's protests and questions about the vacation money. I went directly to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling slightly. Through my window, I could hear Roger and Amanda's muffled conversation. What's her problem? Roger's voice carried clearly. Roger, you left your mom at Goodwill, Amanda replied. That's pretty messed up. Whatever. She's fine. She's just using it to make me feel guilty. Eventually, I heard the front door close and Roger's SUV start up and drive away. The house fell silent, leaving me alone with thoughts that had been building for decades, but that I had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. That night, I sat in Thomas's old study, looking through photo albums from Roger's childhood. I searched for clues, signs I might have missed, moments where intervention could have changed his path. There were so many happy memories, birthday parties, baseball games, family vacations. When had the sweet boy in these photographs transformed into the selfish man who had abandoned me today? More importantly, what was my role in that transformation? As painful as it was to admit, I knew the answer. By allowing Thomas to spoil Roger, by continuing that pattern after Thomas's death, by making excuses for inexcusable behavior, I had failed my son in the most fundamental way. I had failed to teach him how to be a decent human being. The question now was whether it was too late to correct that failure. And if it wasn't too late, what would correction look like at this point in our lives? I fell asleep in Thomas's chair, the photo album open on my lap, tears dried on my cheeks. When morning came, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Monday morning, I called Barbara Williams and requested an urgent meeting. Barbara had been my financial advisor for over 20 years, and one of my closest friends since Thomas's death. She arrived at my home that afternoon, concern evident on her face. "Eleanor, what's wrong? You sounded upset on the phone," she said as we settled in my sunroom with tea. I recounted the entire Goodwill incident, my voice occasionally breaking despite my best efforts to remain composed. Barbara listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to anger to sadness. "And then he asked me for $7,000 for a vacation, right after leaving me stranded," I concluded. Barbara set her teacup down carefully. "Eleanor, I've been telling you for years that Roger's relationship with money isn't healthy. But this goes beyond financial irresponsibility. This is about basic human decency." "I know," I admitted. "I've been making excuses for him his entire life. I convinced myself I was being a good mother by supporting him, but all I've done is create a 45-year-old child who sees me as nothing but an ATM." "It's not entirely your fault," Barbara said gently. "Thomas had a strong influence on how Roger was raised. But Thomas has been gone for 10 years. I've continued the pattern he established." I took a deep breath. "That ends now. I want to change my will and estate plan." Barbara tried to hide her relief, but I knew her well enough to see it. "I think that's a wise decision. What did you have in mind?" "I don't want to cut Roger off completely. He's still my son. But I can't in good conscience leave him my entire estate knowing he'll likely squander it while contributing nothing to society." We spent the next 2 hours discussing alternatives. Barbara suggested setting up a trust with strict conditions for distributions. While that approach had merit, it didn't address the larger issue weighing on my mind. "What bothers me most," I explained, "is thinking about my legacy. I built Patterson Real Estate from nothing. The thought of all that hard work ultimately funding Roger's irresponsibility feels wrong." "Have you considered philanthropy?" Barbara asked. "You've always been passionate about education and entrepreneurship." The suggestion resonated immediately. Over the next week, I researched various charitable options, focusing particularly on organizations that helped underprivileged youth develop business skills. The more I read, the more excited I became about the possibilities. I scheduled a meeting with Calvin Reynolds, my attorney, to discuss establishing a foundation. Calvin had handled Thomas's estate and had been gently suggesting for years that I consider diversifying my legacy plans. "The Eleanor Patterson Business Education Foundation," Calvin said, testing the name aloud during our meeting. "It has a nice ring to it." The focus would be on providing business education, mentorship, and startup capital to young people who demonstrate drive and creativity, but lack financial resources, I explained. The kind of support I never had starting out. Calvin nodded approvingly. "And regarding Roger? I want to leave him the house and a modest trust. Enough that he'll never be destitute, but not enough to maintain his current lifestyle without working." "He won't be happy," Calvin warned. "I know. But I'm not doing this to punish Roger. I'm doing it because I finally understand that my money has become a barrier to his growth, not a support for it." Over the next 3 weeks, Calvin worked to draft the necessary legal documents while I collaborated with Barbara on the financial restructuring. We brought in education experts to help design the foundation's programs and established a board of directors comprised of successful business leaders committed to mentorship. The process was exhausting but exhilarating. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt genuinely excited about the future. My wealth, which had begun to feel like a burden, now represented possibility and positive impact. "You seem different," Barbara commented during one of our planning sessions. "More energized." "I feel different," I admitted. "All these years, I've been defining myself as Roger's mother and Thomas's widow. I forgot that I'm also Eleanor Patterson, businesswoman and creator." The foundation took shape quickly. We established criteria for scholarship recipients, designed a mentorship program, and created a funding structure for promising business proposals. Each decision brought me joy and purpose I hadn't felt in years. During this time, Roger called several times, presumably to follow up about the vacation money. I let his calls go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. His messages grew increasingly irritated, but I remained focused on my task. When all the paperwork was finally complete, I sat in Calvin's office, pen poised over the documents that would reshape my legacy. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Eleanor?" Calvin asked, his tone professional but kind. Once these changes are executed, challenging them later becomes much more difficult. I thought about Roger, about Thomas, about the young Eleanor who had worked 3 jobs to buy her first property. I thought about the young people who would benefit from the foundation, who might not otherwise have the opportunity to develop their potential. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I said and signed the papers. As I left Calvin's office that day, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I had disinherited my son. I hadn't, not really, but because I had finally aligned my resources with my values. The foundation would ensure that my life's work continued to create opportunity long after I was gone. Roger would be upset, certainly. But perhaps, just perhaps, this would be the wake-up call he needed. And if not, at least my fortune would do good in the world rather than enabling more of the same behavior that had led to that painful day at Goodwill. The documents would be formally filed the following week. I knew I should tell Roger about my decision before he found out through official channels. But I needed a little more time to prepare for that difficult conversation. Unfortunately, time was not on my side. I had planned to tell Roger about the changes to my estate plan over dinner the following Sunday. I would explain my reasoning calmly and emphasize that this decision came from love, not punishment. I would assure him that he would always be taken care of, just not to the extent he had expected. But fate had other plans. 3 weeks after finalizing the paperwork, I was in my garden when Roger's car screeched into my driveway. He jumped out, waving an envelope and looking furious. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, storming toward me. I recognized the envelope immediately. It was from Calvin's office, addressed to me. Roger must have checked my mail without permission, something he had done since his teenage years whenever he suspected I was hiding something from him. "That's private correspondence, Roger," I said, setting down my gardening tools and removing my gloves. "Why are you going through my mail?" "Don't change the subject," he snapped. "What the hell is the Eleanor Patterson Business Education Foundation, and why does this letter say you've allocated 75% of your estate to it?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd wanted to have this conversation, but perhaps there was no good way to tell your adult son you drastically reduced his inheritance. "Let's go inside and discuss this rationally," I suggested. "Rationally? You're giving away my inheritance to complete strangers, and you want to discuss it rationally?" His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "It's not your inheritance yet, Roger. It's my money, and I've made a decision about how I want it used after I'm gone." He followed me inside, still clutching the letter. In my living room, I turned to face him. "Roger, I've established a foundation that will help underprivileged young people learn business skills and get the kind of start I never had. It's something I'm very proud of." "And what about me? Your actual flesh and blood?" he demanded. "You're still in my will. You'll receive this house and a trust that will provide for your basic needs." "Basic needs?" he repeated incredulously. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll never be homeless or hungry, but you won't be able to maintain your current lifestyle without working." Roger paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe this. My own mother betraying me like this." "It's not a betrayal, Roger. It's a realignment of my priorities." "Because of the Goodwill thing?" "That was an accident, Mom. I told you I thought you had another ride. This isn't just about Goodwill, though that incident certainly crystallized some things for me. This is about the pattern of our relationship for the past several decades." "What pattern?" "I'm your son. You're supposed to support me. I have supported you, Roger. Financially, emotionally, in every way possible. But I've come to realize that my financial support has become a barrier to your independence, not an aid to it." He stopped pacing and stared at me. "This is insane. Dad would never have allowed this." The mention of Thomas stung, as Roger knew it would. "Your father loved you very much, but he and I disagreed about how to raise you. He believed giving you everything you wanted would make you happy. I've come to understand that it's only made you entitled." "Entitled?" Roger's voice rose. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm some spoiled brat? What would you call someone who abandons his elderly mother at a donation center and then immediately asks her for vacation money?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame cross his face, but it quickly hardened into defensiveness. It was an accident, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. Just as I accidentally changed my will, I replied calmly. Roger's eyes widened at my response. So this is revenge? You're punishing me.
No, Roger.
This is me finally doing what I should have done years ago, setting boundaries and establishing consequences. I'll contest it, he threatened. I'll get a lawyer and fight this. You're welcome to try, but Calvin has ensured everything is legally sound. The foundation is established, the paperwork filed. My mental competence has been thoroughly documented. Roger's face contorted with fury and disbelief. I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything we've been through together. I'm not doing this to you, Roger. I'm doing it for you, and for the young people who will benefit from the foundation. For me? He laughed bitterly. How is taking away my inheritance for me? Because money without purpose corrupts character. I've watched it happen to you and I take responsibility for my role in that. This is my attempt to correct my mistake. Roger stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In some ways perhaps he was. The mother he knew would have backed down by now, made excuses, tried to smooth things over. That mother was gone. Dad would be ashamed of you, he said finally, his voice cold. He wanted me to have everything. Your father wanted you to be happy, I corrected gently. We just disagreed about what would accomplish that. Roger gathered his keys and wallet, which he had thrown on the coffee table. This isn't over. I'm going to fight this, and when I win, don't expect to hear from me again. I hope you'll reconsider, Roger. I'd like us to have a relationship based on more than financial dependency. He laughed harshly. Yeah, well, good luck with that. Roger stormed out, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. Through the window, I watched him peel out of my driveway, gravel spraying behind his tires. I sank onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted but strangely calm. The confrontation had gone about as poorly as I had expected, but I had maintained my resolve. Roger's reaction, while painful to witness, only confirmed that I had made the right decision. Later that evening, my phone rang repeatedly with calls from Roger that I didn't answer. His voicemails ranged from angry threats about contesting the will to tearful reminiscences about his childhood, clearly designed to make me feel guilty. One message mentioned Thomas extensively, describing how disappointed he would be in my decisions. That night, I looked at my late husband's photograph on my bedside table. I know you wanted to give him the world, Thomas, I whispered. But I think what he needs most is to learn how to navigate it on his own. I slept surprisingly well, despite the emotional turbulence of the day. Something had shifted within me. A burden lifted, a truth acknowledged. Roger might never forgive me for this decision. He might successfully contest the will, though Calvin assured me that was unlikely. But regardless of the outcome, I had finally acted according to my values rather than my fears. The next morning, I received a text from Amanda, Roger's girlfriend. Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry about yesterday. Roger isn't thinking clearly right now. Please know that I understand why you did what you did. The message was unexpected but oddly comforting. Perhaps there was hope for Roger after all, if he had chosen a partner with more insight than he currently possessed himself. I replied simply, "Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your understanding." The days that followed were quiet. Roger made good on his threat to consult an attorney, as Calvin informed me when he received formal correspondence requesting all documentation related to my mental competence at the time of the will's modification. It's a standard tactic, Calvin reassured me. They have no grounds to stand on. You're clearly of sound mind, and your estate plan, while perhaps unexpected, is perfectly reasonable. I nodded, unsurprised by Roger's actions but still disappointed. How long will this process take? It could be months, possibly a year if they pursue every available avenue. Are you prepared for that? I am, I said with conviction. And in the meantime, I want to move forward with the foundation. There's no reason to delay helping young entrepreneurs, while Roger throws his tantrum. Calvin smiled, a rare expression from my usually stoic attorney. I've represented you for 20 years, Eleanor, but I don't think I've ever seen you quite this resolute. It took me 68 years to find my backbone where my son is concerned, I replied. Better late than never. 6 months passed without a word from Roger. His attorney continued to file motions and requests for documentation, all of which Calvin handled efficiently and without concern. The legal challenges were, as he had predicted, more nuisance than threat. During this time, I threw myself into developing the foundation. We established headquarters in a small office building I owned downtown, hired a small but dedicated staff, and began reviewing applications for our first round of scholarships. Reading the applications was both heartbreaking and inspiring. So many brilliant young minds with entrepreneurial ideas, but lacking the resources to pursue them. A 19-year-old with an innovative recycling concept. A 22-year-old single mother with a business plan for affordable childcare centers. A group of high school students who had developed an app to connect elderly residents with neighborhood helpers. In each of these young people, I saw echoes of my younger self. Determined, creative, hard-working, but lacking connections and capital. The foundation would provide not just funding but mentorship, business education, and networking opportunities. We would give them what I had to fight so hard to achieve on my own. The day we announced our first 10 scholarship recipients was one of the proudest of my life. Seeing their faces during the ceremony, hearing their stories and plans, filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. You've created something remarkable here, Eleanor, Barbara said at the reception afterward. This is a legacy worth leaving. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Normally I would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. Mrs. Patterson? This is Amanda. Amanda? Is everything all right? I hadn't heard from Roger's girlfriend since her text message months ago. I thought you should know that Roger and I broke up last month, she said, her voice hesitant. And there are some things I think you should be aware of. We arranged to meet for coffee the following day at a quiet cafe downtown. Amanda arrived looking nervous but determined, quite different from the passive young woman I remembered lounging by my pool. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I've been debating whether to contact you for weeks. I appreciate that you did. What's happened with Roger? Amanda sighed, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. After your confrontation about the will, Roger became obsessed with fighting it. It's all he talked about, all he focused on. He hired this expensive attorney, and when I asked how he could afford it, she paused. He told me he'd been borrowing money from your accounts for years. My stomach dropped. What do you mean borrowing? He said you'd given him access to some of your accounts for emergencies, but he'd been taking money regularly without telling you. He seemed to think it was justified because it would be his anyway someday. I felt physically ill. I had indeed given Roger emergency access to one of my accounts years ago, when I was hospitalized briefly. I had forgotten to revoke that access, naively trusting my son not to abuse it. How much has he taken? I asked quietly. I don't know exactly, but from things he said I think it's substantial. That's partly why I left him. That and his plan to contest your mental competence. She looked disgusted. He wanted me to testify that you seemed confused and disoriented whenever I saw you. When I refused, he got angry. Really angry. I'm sorry you went through that, I said, genuinely concerned. Are you safe? Infine. I moved in with my sister in Portland. She hesitated. There's something else. Roger's been contacting Melissa. Melissa? I repeated, confused for a moment before realizing. My granddaughter? Roger's ex-wife Diane had primary custody of their daughter Melissa after their divorce 8 years ago. Roger had shown little interest in parenting, visiting sporadically at best. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts but had minimal contact with my only grandchild, something that had always saddened me. He's been filling her head with stories about how you've gone crazy and are trying to cut them both out of your life. I thought you should know. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so hurtful. Roger was using his own daughter as a pawn in his financial game. Thank you for telling me this, Amanda. I appreciate your honesty. After our meeting, I called Calvin immediately and had him initiate an audit of all my accounts. The results were staggering. Over the past 5 years, Roger had systematically siphoned nearly $300,000 from the emergency account, making withdrawals just small enough to avoid triggering alerts. Calvin helped me file the necessary paperwork to document the theft and secure my remaining accounts. Whether to press charges was a decision I would have to make eventually, but not yet. First, I needed to address another wrong. Using the contact information Amanda had provided, I reached out to Diane, explaining that I would like to reconnect with Melissa if possible. To my surprise, Diane was receptive. To be honest, Eleanor, I've always felt bad about how things ended up between you and Melissa, she said during our phone call. Roger made it so difficult, always scheduling conflicts when you wanted to visit, intercepting gifts. After a while, it just seemed easier to let it go. I should have tried harder, I admitted. I let my relationship with Roger dictate my relationship with Melissa. We all made mistakes, Diane said kindly. But Melissa is 16 now. She can make her own decisions about who she wants in her life. 2 weeks later, Diane and Melissa came to my house for lunch. My granddaughter was no longer the little girl I remembered but a poised young woman with her mother's gentle manner and, I noted with a pang, Thomas's eyes. "Grandma Eleanor," she said, embracing me somewhat shyly. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I agreed, fighting back tears. "I've missed so much." Over lunch, we began the delicate process of getting to know each other again. Melissa was intelligent and thoughtful, interested in environmental science and sustainable business models. Her mother had clearly done an excellent job raising her. "Dad said you started some kind of foundation?" Melissa asked carefully. "I did. Would you like to hear about it?" As I described the foundation's mission and the young entrepreneurs we were supporting, Melissa's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That sounds amazing," she said. "Those are exactly the kind of businesses we need more of. Would you like to visit the foundation sometime? See what we're doing firsthand?" "I'd love that," she said, her initial reserve melting away. Before they left, I showed Melissa the photos of her father as a child, the same albums I had looked through the night after the Goodwill incident. She studied them curiously, as if trying to reconcile the smiling boy in the pictures with the father she knew. "He looks happy," she observed. "He was once," I said softly. "I hope he will be again someday." As spring turned to summer, my life fell into a new rhythm. Mornings at the foundation, afternoons often spent with Melissa, who had become a regular volunteer, particularly interested in our environmental business initiatives. Diane and I developed a warm friendship, both of us recognizing that family connections were too precious to sacrifice to past conflicts. Meanwhile, Roger's legal challenges continued without success. His attorney's attempts to question my mental competence were dismissed based on thorough psychological evaluations Calvin had wisely arranged during the estate planning process. The documentation of Roger's unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts had further undermined his case. 7 months after our confrontation, I received a call from Roger's number. It was the first direct contact since he had stormed out of my house that day. I answered with trepidation. "Mom." His voice sounded different. Subdued, perhaps even humbled. "Can we talk?" "Of course, Roger. Not on the phone. In person. Please." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When Roger arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. He had lost weight, and there was a weariness in his eyes I had never seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I know you probably didn't want to. You're my son, Roger. I'll always meet with you." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "My lawyer quit yesterday. Said there was no point continuing with the case." "I see. And my landlord is evicting me next week. I can't make rent." He looked up, his expression a mixture of desperation and lingering defiance. "So I guess you won." This was never about winning or losing, Roger. It was about trying to break a destructive pattern. By cutting me off, taking away my inheritance, turning Melissa against me. I haven't turned Melissa against you. I've simply built my own relationship with her, which I should have done years ago. As for your inheritance, you still have one. It's just not what you expected. Not enough to live on," he muttered. "Not enough to live on without working," I corrected. "There's a difference." Roger ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that it made my heart ache. I don't know what you want from me, Mom. I don't want anything from you, Roger. That's the point. For too long, our relationship has been defined by what you want from me: money, support, bailouts. I'd like us to have a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine connection instead. And if I need a place to stay when I get evicted, is that mutual respect or just another handout? I considered my response carefully. There's a difference between supporting someone through a difficult time and enabling dependence. I'm willing to help you transition to independence, but I won't return to our old patterns. Roger was quiet for a long moment. What does that mean exactly? It means you can stay in the guest house temporarily, while you find a job and get back on your feet. But there will be conditions, and it will be temporary. Conditions, he repeated, a hint of the old bitterness in his voice. Yes, Roger. Conditions. Because I love you too much to watch you continue down this path. Our conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, covering difficult ground that had been avoided for decades. There were moments of tension, moments of defensiveness on both sides, but also moments of surprising honesty. For perhaps the first time, we spoke to each other as adults, without the distorting influence of unlimited financial support creating a perpetual parent-child dynamic. When we parted, nothing was resolved. Roger hadn't agreed to my conditions, and I hadn't retreated from my position. But a door had been opened, a possibility of change acknowledged. As I watched him walk away, I felt a complex mixture of hope and sadness. Changing the deeply ingrained patterns of our relationship would not be easy or quick. There would be setbacks, resistance, perhaps even failure. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a different future for my son and for our family. Whether Roger would walk through that door remained to be seen. But I had done what I needed to do, not just for myself or for the young entrepreneurs who would benefit from the foundation, but ultimately for Roger too. Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even when, especially when, those boundaries are painful to establish. The foundation was thriving. My relationship with Melissa was blossoming. And now perhaps there was hope for healing with Roger too. Not the easy, superficial piece of enablement, but the harder, more meaningful piece of genuine connection. It wasn't the legacy I had imagined leaving, but it was becoming the one I was proud to build. 1 year after the fateful day at Goodwill, I stood at a podium in the Foundation's headquarters, preparing to address the audience gathered for our first annual scholarship ceremony. The room was filled with proud families, community leaders, and the 20 young entrepreneurs who had received support from the Eleanor Patterson Business Education Foundation over the past year. From my position at the front of the room, I could see Melissa sitting in the front row beside her mother, both of them beaming with pride. Barbara sat nearby, along with Calvin and several board members who had become dear friends through our work together. What I didn't expect to see was Roger, slipping quietly into a seat at the back of the room just as I was about to begin speaking. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The past year had been transformative in ways I never could have imagined when Roger abandoned me at that Goodwill donation center. What had begun as a painful betrayal had catalyzed changes that rippled through every aspect of my life. Welcome, everyone, to the first annual Eleanor Patterson Foundation Scholarship Ceremony. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt seeing my son in attendance. When I established this foundation, my goal was to create opportunities for young entrepreneurs who have the vision and determination to succeed, but lack the resources and connections that often make success possible. As I spoke about the foundation's mission and introduced the scholarship recipients, I couldn't help reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Each of these young people had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their dreams. Their stories of persistence and creativity reminded me of my own early struggles, but also highlighted how much more they had accomplished with so much less advantage than Roger had been given. Jasmine, a 20-year-old who had developed an innovative urban farming system while living in a shelter for homeless youth. Marcus, whose sustainable fashion company employed formerly incarcerated individuals, giving them marketable skills and steady income. Kira, whose technology platform connected elderly residents with affordable home care options, inspired by her own experience caring for her grandmother. These young people weren't just building businesses, They were solving problems, strengthening communities, creating meaning. They represented everything I had hoped the foundation would accomplish. After the formal ceremony concluded, I mingled with the attendees, congratulating scholarship recipients and chatting with their proud families. Eventually, I made my way to the back of the room where Roger remained, watching the proceedings with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm surprised to see you here," I said quietly. "Melissa invited me," he replied. "She's been volunteering here, apparently." "She has. She's become quite passionate about sustainable business models." Roger nodded, looking around the room. "This is impressive, Mom. What you've built here." The compliment was unexpected, especially coming from Roger. "Thank you. That means a lot. Some of these kids' ideas are actually pretty amazing," he continued, gesturing toward where Marcus was enthusiastically explaining his business model to a group of attendees. "That guy with the fashion company?" I looked at his website. "The designs are really good." "They are," I agreed. "And his social impact model is even more impressive." An awkward silence fell between us. There was so much unresolved, so many conversations we still needed to have. But this moment of connection, however tentative, felt like a beginning. "How are things going with your job?" I asked carefully. After our coffee shop conversation 6 months ago, Roger had surprised me by declining my offer of temporary housing. Instead, he had taken a position as a sales associate at a high-end electronics store, leveraging his natural charm and people skills in a constructive way, perhaps for the first time in his life. "It's going well, actually," he said. "They promoted me to assistant manager last month." "Roger, that's wonderful. Congratulations." He shrugged, but I could see the hint of pride in his eyes. "It's not running a real estate empire or anything, but it's something I'm actually good at. And I'm taking some online business courses at night." "Business courses?" "Marketing and management. Figured it was time I learned how this stuff actually works, instead of just assuming I could do it naturally." He hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if I could talk to you sometime. About business, I mean. Get your advice." The request touched me deeply. In all our years together, Roger had never asked for my business expertise, only my financial support. I'd like that very much. As the event wound down, Melissa joined us, her enthusiasm infectious as she described the projects she had been working on with the foundation. "Grandma Eleanor's letting me develop a youth advisory board for the foundation," she told her father, "to help evaluate applications from teenage entrepreneurs and provide peer mentorship." "That sounds great, kiddo," Roger said, and the genuine warmth in his voice as he spoke to his daughter gave me hope that healing was possible there too. Later, as the last guests departed, I found myself alone in the foundation office, reflecting on the day and the year that had preceded it. The journey had been painful at times, filled with difficult conversations and hard boundaries. There had been legal battles, emotional confrontations, and periods of complete silence between Roger and myself. But standing in this space that represented my true legacy, not just the money I had earned but the values I believed in, I felt a profound sense of peace. The foundation was thriving, helping young entrepreneurs build businesses that created both profit and purpose. My relationship with my granddaughter had blossomed into one of the greatest joys of my life. And Roger, against all expectations, was taking his first tentative steps toward genuine independence and self-respect. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a small gift bag on my desk that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a framed photograph of Roger, Melissa, and me, taken at Thomas's birthday celebration many years ago. We were all laughing at something now forgotten, a rare moment of genuine family connection captured forever. A small note was attached. "Mom, I'm sorry it took being left at Goodwill for me to start growing up. Better late than never, I guess. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when you had every reason to. Love, Roger." The simple message brought tears to my eyes. Our relationship was far from healed, the patterns of decades not easily undone. But this small acknowledgement represented something I had almost stopped believing was possible. Growth, accountability, the potential for change. I carefully placed the frame on my desk, where it would serve as a daily reminder of what truly mattered. My legacy wasn't the wealth I had accumulated or even the foundation I had established. It was the lessons I had finally learned about the true meaning of love, That sometimes it means setting boundaries, demanding accountability, and allowing those we care about to experience the consequences of their actions. The decision to change my will had never been about punishing Roger. It had been about creating the conditions for him to finally grow into the man he was capable of becoming. By refusing to continue enabling his dependence, I had given him the only gift that really mattered, the opportunity to develop his own strength, his own capabilities, his own sense of purpose. As I turned out the lights and locked the foundation office, I felt profound gratitude for that painful day at Goodwill. What had seemed like abandonment had actually been the catalyst for transformation, not just for Roger but for me as well. In standing up for myself, in refusing to continue our unhealthy patterns, I had reclaimed not just my resources but my self-respect. The road ahead would not be easy. Real change never is. But for the first time in decades, I had hoped that Roger might find his way to genuine independence and fulfillment. Not through inheritance or entitlement, but through the same path that had brought me success. Hard work, perseverance, and purpose. That, I now understood, was the true meaning of goodwill. Not the inheritance Roger had expected, but the genuine wish for his welfare that had finally led me to stop enabling and start empowering. By dropping his name from my fortune, I had given him the chance to make his own. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision out of love that someone else interpreted as betrayal? How did you handle that situation and what was the outcome? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries, even when it breaks our hearts to do so. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to make the difficult choices that lead to growth and healing in your own life.